The jar of honey sitting in your kitchen cupboard almost certainly is not what the label implies. Not where it came from, not how it was processed, and in some cases not even entirely what it claims to be. And the way British supermarket shelves are currently stocked, with hundreds of options at wildly different price points, all using legal but deliberately vague labeling. The average shopper has almost no practical way to tell the difference between a jar of genuine British honey and a product that was blended, heat-treated, and packaged to look like one. What you last bought at the checkout may have come from a dozen different countries. It may have been ultra-filtered. It may have been heated until the very enzymes that make honey nutritionally worthwhile were quietly destroyed. And none of that would have appeared anywhere on the label. In this video, we are going to break down exactly how the UK honey market actually works, who controls it, how products are labelled to your disadvantage, and why genuine British honey has become one of the most commercially pressured items on the shelf. And then we are going to give you 4 specific brands that cut through all of that. 4 brands that, in 2026, we are confident enough to name by name. If you leave this video early, you will miss the section that explains what the phrase blend of EU and non-EU honeys actually means in practice, because it is not what most people assume. You will also miss the section on what distinguishes genuinely raw, traceable British honey from products that have borrowed the same language to sell something entirely different. This video is not about fear. It is about knowing exactly what you are paying for before your next shop. The supply gap. Nobody mentions at the shelf. Britain consumes roughly 40,000 tons of honey every year. British beekeepers produce somewhere in the region of 5,000 to 6,000 tons annually. That means for every jar of genuinely British honey on a supermarket shelf, there are approximately 6 more filled with imported product, sourced from countries including China, Ukraine, Argentina, and across the EU, blended into large batches that end up under both branded and own-label packaging. None of that is inherently wrong. Imported honey can be genuine, high quality, and perfectly safe. The problem is what happens when price pressure, weak labeling rules, and a lack of consumer awareness collide in the same aisle. In 2023, the European Food Safety Authority published findings showing that close to 46% of imported honey samples tested in its study failed basic authenticity checks. The most common finding was adulteration. Sugar syrups, often rice syrup or corn syrup, mixed into honey to bulk it out at a fraction of the cost. These syrups are now sophisticated enough that standard laboratory testing cannot always detect them. Some of the samples that failed were destined for EU supermarket shelves. Britain, since leaving the EU, is no longer automatically covered by that same testing regime or subject to the same enforcement triggers. So when you pick up a budget jar of honey from a UK supermarket at £1.99 or £2.49, you are buying from a supply chain that has, in practice, never had to prove to a British regulator what is actually inside that jar. The labelling game. Here is where it gets more specific. UK honey labelling law, retained from EU regulations post-Brexit, requires honey to carry a country of origin. But it has a significant carve-out. When honey is sourced from multiple countries, the label is legally permitted to say simply blend of EU honeys, blend of non-EU honeys, or the now familiar blend of EU and non-EU honeys. That single phrase can legally cover honey sourced from up to 20 or 30 individual countries, and there is no requirement to name any of them. Now layer that with another mechanism called ultrafiltration. Honey naturally contains pollen grains, microscopic particles that are, in food science terms, the fingerprints of honey. They tell analysts exactly which flowers the bees visited and, by extension, which region of the world the honey came from. Ultrafiltration strips those pollen grains out entirely. It extends shelf life, produces a cleaner and more visually appealing product, and, crucially, makes independent origin verification practically impossible, It is also entirely legal in the UK, so you can have a jar labelled pure honey with no artificial ingredients, technically compliant with every applicable UK food law that nobody on earth could reliably trace back to its source. That is not a hypothetical. That describes a significant proportion of what sits on British supermarket shelves right now. Why raw and British actually means something when it is real. Against that backdrop, genuine raw British honey is not a lifestyle product or a premium marketing category. It is the standard that honey was held to as a matter of course before industrial processing got involved. Raw honey is honey that has not been heated above the natural temperature of a beehive, around 35 to 37 degrees Celsius. It retains its natural enzymes, its pollen content, its antimicrobial properties, and its genuine flavor character. Traceable British honey comes from hives in identifiable locations, from beekeepers who can tell you exactly what flowers are in bloom within foraging distance of their colonies. The reason these qualities have become premium talking points rather than baseline expectations is purely commercial. Heating honey allows it to be processed faster, bottled more efficiently, filtered more finely, and stored far longer. For a manufacturer operating at industrial scale, the heat-processed blended honey is dramatically cheaper to produce. The market has moved accordingly, and genuine raw honey has been repositioned as a niche indulgence, when in reality it is simply what honey was before it became a commodity. There are approximately 25,000 to 35,000 beekeepers in the United Kingdom. The overwhelming majority are hobbyists and small-scale operators, people keeping a handful of hives in their gardens, on allotments, on farm margins and hillsides across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. A small number of commercial-scale beekeepers exist, but they are operating in a market where genuine British honey commands a premium that the average shopper has been commercially conditioned not to pay. The economics are unforgiving. A single colony of bees in the UK can produce anywhere from 5 to 30 kilograms of surplus honey in a good season, depending on location and conditions. Given British summers, the real ones, a difficult year can mean almost no surplus at all. That makes genuine British honey limited, seasonal, and genuinely expensive to produce. When a jar of imported blended honey retails at £1.99 beside a jar of genuine British raw honey at £7.99, the shopper reaching for the cheaper option is not being irrational. They are responding to a price signal shaped by a market flooded with product that does not carry the same costs, the same risks, or the same level of care. What happens if small-scale British beekeeping continues to decline commercially? Beyond the financial loss to individual producers, the consequences reach into every garden in Britain. Managed honeybee populations contribute meaningfully to the pollination of both wild plant life and British food crops. That ecological value does not appear anywhere on a honey price label, but it is real and it is being quietly subsidized or quietly eroded by every purchasing decision made in the honey aisle. The honey industry, both the large branded players and own-label manufacturers, is not in the business of making sourcing transparent. It is in the business of making sourcing palatable. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. The blend of EU and non-EU honeys label is not an accident of regulation. It is a mechanism that has been in place long enough for the industry to build its entire supply chain around its flexibility. When a branded manufacturer describes its honey as carefully selected, that phrase carries no regulatory weight whatsoever. It means whatever the manufacturer chooses it to mean. The term raw honey has no legal definition in UK food law as of 2026. Any honey product can carry the word raw on its label without meeting any specific standard. That is not a loophole. It is an absence of law that some manufacturers have exploited with considerable commercial success. A consumer buying raw honey at a mainstream supermarket price point should treat that claim with real skepticism, unless it is supported by additional, independently verifiable information. British honey on a label is legally enforceable. Honey sold as British must have come from British hives. But a product blended from British and imported honey can legally carry blend language while still prominently featuring British countryside imagery and pastoral branding on its packaging. The visual story and the legal reality are not always the same thing. Learning to read past the design is one of the most useful skills any honey buyer in Britain can develop right now. The 4 brands you should buy in 2026. Having laid out exactly what you are navigating in the honey aisle, here are 4 brands that represent genuine quality, honest sourcing and meaningful transparency, and in most cases, all 3. Hilltop Honey. Founded in Wales and now one of the most visible independent honey brands in British supermarkets, Hilltop has built its reputation on plain language transparency. Their raw honey range is genuinely raw and UK-sourced, and the brand has consistently communicated its provenance without resorting to vague marketing language. You will find them in Tesco, Sainsbury's and Waitrose, which removes the accessibility argument against choosing quality honey for everyday use. Their raw Welsh Blossom honey is the most straightforward recommendation on this list. It is widely available, honestly labelled and priced within realistic reach. Rouse British Blossom. A word of precision here because it matters significantly. Rouse is the UK's biggest honey brand and the majority of their range is imported blended product. We are not recommending the standard Rose range. We are recommending their specifically British Blossom line, a distinct product sourced exclusively from British beekeepers, clearly labelled, and meeting a sourcing standard that the rest of their range does not. If you are buying Rose, check the label carefully. The range is broader than the British Blossom, and most of it carries none of the same provenance guarantees. Bermondsey Street. Bees. This is the artisan entry on this list, and the price reflects it honestly. Bermondsey Street Bees is a London-based producer, urban beekeeping conducted at a level of traceability that is almost forensic. You will know which London rooftops, parks and gardens your honey was foraged from. It is sold direct and through select independent retailers. It will cost more than anything else on this list. But if you want honey with a provenance chain clear enough to visit the source, this is the closest the UK market currently offers. The Raw Honey Shop. An online retailer rather than a single producer, but included here specifically because of their curation standards. The Raw Honey Shop operates as a sourcing platform for genuinely traceable UK and small batch honeys, and every product they stock carries identifiable origin information. For shoppers who want variety across different British floral sources and regions without needing to forensically assess individual jars at a supermarket shelf, this is the most practically useful option on this list. What you can do about it. There are 5 steps that will materially change what ends up in your kitchen. First, treat. Blend of EU and non-EU honeys as a sourcing red flag, not a neutral description. When you see that phrase, you are looking at a product with no traceable origin and no legal obligation to disclose one. That does not make it automatically unsafe, but it does mean you have no way of verifying what you are actually buying. Second, use price as a quality signal in honey specifically. Genuine British raw honey from a responsible small producer cannot be made and sold profitably below approximately £4 to £5 for a standard jar. If a product is priced below that threshold while claiming to be British and raw, the maths do not add up. Third, stop treating raw honey as a guarantee without supporting evidence. Ask yourself, does this product carry an identifiable beekeeper, a named geographic source, or any third-party certification? If the label says only raw and nothing further, the word is decorative rather than informative. Fourth, if you have access to a local farmer's market, buy directly from a British beekeeper at least once. This is not about sentimentality around local food. It is about establishing a genuine reference point, understanding what honey with a real and uninterrupted provenance actually looks, smells, and tastes like. Once you have that benchmark, the difference in processed blended honey becomes obvious. Fifth, when buying online, look for pollen content disclosure. The better UK honey retailers will identify the floral pollen sources present in a given product. That is the strongest non-laboratory indicator that what you are buying is genuinely unfiltered and traceable, because you simply cannot disclose pollen content if you have ultra-filtered the product to remove it. 3 things to carry into your next shop. When you see blend of EU and non-EU honeys, put it back and take an extra minute to find something with a named source, because the information gap that phrase represents is not an accident. The word raw on a British honey label means nothing without supporting evidence, so look past the front and read the detail. And if you are choosing between accessible supermarket options, Hilltop Honey's Raw Range and Rose British Blossom are the 2 most widely available products that have earned a straightforward recommendation in 2026. Check out truth. UK exists because the gap between what an industry knows about its own products and what a consumer can reasonably discover in a 3-second shelf decision is, in most categories, enormous. Honey is a small but genuinely instructive example of how labeling rules that appear to protect the consumer can, in practice, operate in almost the opposite direction. You now know more about what is in your honey jar than the vast majority of shoppers ever will, and you know which 4 brands have done enough to earn a place in your kitchen. If you have ever paid a premium for honey that turned out to be something quite different, a Manuka that was not really Manuka, a British blossom that tasted like nothing in particular, we would like to hear about it in the comments below. And if you found this video useful, subscribe to Check Out Truth UK. We publish carefully researched breakdowns of everyday products, the kind of information that is rarely visible on the label, but always affects what you are paying for. Thank you for watching.